It is 6 o'clock, and so we'll get started. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order this evening and get us through to the point when you nominate and elect a chair, and then I'm going to turn it over to the chair to go from that point forward to do that. So I'm really quick, going to do a roll call, and apologize. I was given a list with all last names, so hopefully I won't mess anybody's. I know you're Sharon, is that
Sharon.
right? Sharon, okay, present. Bellegriff? Oh, Amy, yes, okay. Devunzio, that's Anthony, right? Devunzio, am I saying it wrong? Devin Chazo, I said it wrong. Mr. Dunmere is not here. Ms. Cook, present. Member Falcone, just got here. I'm going to kill this next one. Dungisha.
You can call me
Okay.
Beth.
Beth. All right, great. Mr. Custer here, and Terry McCarthy. Great. If we can, let's go ahead and have a moment of silence, and then we'll stand for the pledge. Stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm actually going to skip the approving of the agenda. I should have put that down after we elected a chair, and then we could approve the agenda for this evening. So we have nominations for the chair of this committee. We have a second for that.
I second.
To a vote, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None? I'm going to turn the meeting over to you.
Next, we have a nomination for vice chair. Nominations. It's hard when you don't know each other.
You're the only guy that met him.
Anybody interested in the position?
Yes.
Nominate. Second,
Second.
all in favor? Signify by saying aye. Aye. Got it. Nomination of a secretary. Do we have any nominations? Anyone interested?
I can do that role.
Thank you very
I'm a
much.
good note taker.
Okay,
Second.
excellent. Be your second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have a board. First item going forward is approving the agenda. Do we have a motion? Approve.
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Next on the agenda is public comment, and this will be for agenda items. Somebody say related to the agenda? We stand up. I guess we're going over there.
Yeah, they'd be over here, please. Well, if anybody's coming forward while they're doing that, I'm just going to take people's name tags so that everybody. And you may need to.
Hi
State
there.
your name and address, please.
Cindy Mahalo, 87 Hunters Run. I'm vice chair of the Township Environmental Advisory Council, and I was a member of the task force along with John and several other people who worked on the Greenways, I never get the name right, open space and trails plan. Implementing, developing that plan that you all are going to implement. And I'm just very excited to be here and just wanted to welcome you and thank you for stepping up to serve and wish you well in your endeavors. And we're very excited. I know I speak for everyone else on the task force and on the EAC that this body now exists, and John, that you're in charge of it. And speaking on behalf of the EAC, we're just available to coordinate with you and help you. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Cindy. If anybody does not know what the EAC does, they've been absolutely wonderful. I was privileged to work on the EAC for a while, but Cindy is very prolific and she's done an awful lot of good things for the township. So thank you, Cindy. Okay. All right. Next, we have a presentation by George Sherritz on the Delaware County Trails Grant.
I've asked George to give you all a presentation briefly of what the board voted on. They've already authorized a resolution for us to do this grant, but I just thought it was important, since this group was just getting started, to know what it is that we're going for. And then George is going to go ahead and give us a quick presentation on that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. George Sherritz, Director of Public Works at Newtown Township. So Newtown Township is in the process of applying for a trail grant, and I just want to share a little information with this group about that. In mid to late June, Delaware County Council announced a grant program for open space trails and recreation. We became aware of that grant in July, and it officially opens on August the 27th, and it closes on September the 13th. So there's a very small window to apply for it and to gear up to put something together. Because this committee had not yet met, and I know that working on grants is something that this committee is going to be doing in the future, we didn't want to miss the opportunity. So township staff quickly reviewed the Greenways plan and looked at something that we could present to the Board of Supervisors, because we needed to get a resolution from the board in order to be able to apply for the grant. So, and there was only one meeting we could do it at. So we reviewed the Greenways plan, and we requested that the board permit us to apply for a grant to do a feasibility study for the trail connecting Brookside Park with Greer Park, which then connects to Newtown Street Road. And eventually there's 3 trails via Newtown Street Road that you would be able to connect to. The currently being built Ellis Trail, the Lissitor Trail, and the Goshen Trail. And again, between when you add in the sidewalks that are part of the mechanism with Ellis Preserve and the area, it really opens up a lot of connections. So we decided that would be a wise one to go for because it was in the Greenways. This trail between Brookside Park and Greer Park runs primarily along what was the old Pennsylvania Railroad bed. And it's been called by a lot of people the Newtown Square Rail Trail. The reason for going for the Newtown Square Rail Trail portion of the plan is that it fits with many parts of the Township Greenways plan, the Delaware County and the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission's long-range plans for trails. So that gives it additional opportunity to be successful with being awarded the grant. The Newtown Township Comprehensive Plan specifically identifies this as a potential trail. The trail segment is also specifically mentioned in the Newtown Township Greenways and Open Space Network Plan. So 2 documents that are adopted by the Newtown Township specifically talk about it. It fits in with the Delaware County Comprehensive Plan, which is called Delaware County 2035 Plan. So it's specifically called out in the Delaware County proposal. And then on top of that, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission's Circuit Trail System, which is part of the greater Philadelphia region's proposed trail system, specifically talks about this as a potential trail. So bottom line, Newtown Township sees this trail as important. So does Delaware County. So does the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. They've all shown it on their maps as potential trails. So this would give us a good chance of being awarded the grant to perform a good feasibility study. Good preparation work was done by the township investigating this trail as a potential in 2005 through 2007. So there was some homework that was done ahead of time. Now, the feasibility study is critical. It's not an easy road ahead for this trail segment to be finalized. And at this stage, this is investigation. The real estate of the old railroad bed is owned by PICO. While there's lots of people that would like the trail to be there, not everybody does. Not everybody's in favor of a trail going through there. And we need to listen to them. There's challenges, and the feasibility study would determine exactly that. The homework, the evaluation, the measurements, and the sincere discussion with all the people that would be involved with that trail. And the feasibility study should at the end answer the question, is this the right trail and does it make sense? Well, we have to do the homework. That's what the grant request is. So we're going into the grant request believing it would be a very beneficial trail for the local community, as well as for the extended region. And that is the grant that we're going for. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Who is the issuing body? Is it Delaware County, or is it coming through the state, or what?
It is Delaware County specifically.
Okay, and their funding is from all the Delaware County. It's not coming from the state. That's what I'm saying. I'm just curious about the stipulations. If we're going to go for it so quickly, what type of things we need to have on our checklist, which could change. That's what I want.
Sure. So, and right now, the staff is taking responsibility for putting it in because this committee wasn't going to have a chance to do all that homework. Steve, if you want, I mean, we could certainly forward the Delaware County information to the members of the committee.
Absolutely.
It's public, so it's something that we could send out.
I think the nice thing about this is there's no matching funds,
That is correct.
which I haven't seen before in quite a while.
That is correct. One of the other things that we liked about it is that it could be very focused on planning. So it's not necessarily the development and the execution of it, but it could be the planning, the feasibility, the homework.
Is there somebody we already have in mind as a technical expert? Is it going to be Gilmore Associates again? As far as like in feasibility study, doing updates to the cost estimates of the plan and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. So
or is it strictly within this council that we're doing this from?
as of this point, we're not naming a firm that would do it. I think once the grant is awarded, then we would determine if we're going to do an RFP, if we're going to appoint somebody to do it. But at this point, we're not naming them. There's a number of people that would be qualified. Okay. Mhm. Right. So there is a time limit. The grant paperwork, which again, I will forward to the members of the committee, spells out what the deadlines are, when the notification, and then when the benchmarks are for everything with it. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is new business, and we need to adopt the meeting schedule for the remainder of 2021.
I just looked at that and I said, it doesn't look right.
Nice to have.
It actually should be the 21st, the 19th, and the 16th. Good catch. Yep.
Okay, yeah,
I saw that and I thought, Sunday?
that would have been a Saturday, wouldn't it?
Actually, I think,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
would have been Sunday, but
All right. Does anybody have a problem with these dates? the
May I
board.
just ask a question? We, again, still new as being a supervisor, layering answer, but why do we not have them meeting holidays or?
We held, I thought we were going to put one on. We usually put it as an optional meeting.
Yeah.
A lot of the committees canceled the December meeting because of it being, and in this case, and my guess is that may have been the reason. This case, it would be the 20th, or not, I'm sorry, the 21st of December. So if this group is interested, we can go ahead and schedule it now and advertise. It's up to you. I know you're going to be busy the first several months, kind of getting your feet wet. So
Always cancel it if you don't want. I think it's,
Yeah.
being new, my recommendation, again, I don't have a vote. I would say just put it on your calendar.
Yeah. Does any board member have an objection to putting that on the calendar? Okay.
it would be December 21st.
Yeah.
It is a repeat. Unless I'm looking at my calendar wrong.
At 6 or 7 o'clock.
I believe we have them all set at 6. Do you?
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just so used to a lot of our meetings being at 7.
Is the 21st.
Would anybody prefer a 7 o'clock date? Okay. All right. All right, do I have a motion? To approve.
Motion approved.
Second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Sorry, I missed who the second was. I missed who the second was. Who seconded it?
Either.
I think we both said it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
okay.
Echo.
All right, next on the agenda is a review of the township's open space network plan.
So in front of you is a document that looks like this. So this document's available on the website. You may have seen it and hopefully you have. I thought it was important that every person have just a copy that they could refer to. In this document, this is what we've adopted as the township as potential trails throughout the township. It's a nice, it was done by Gilmore. I think it's a good overview of where we are. I would make note in particular, as you go further back in the document, it talks about the process through the public participation piece. And I think it's important to read through that and understand how the public participated and what some of their comments and thoughts were. As you're making decisions, you are the public yourselves, but you're also at some levels representing the whole community. And so it's important to understand that. And so I encourage you to look through that part. And then as we get further back in the document, I think we're starting on page 33. It has a whole section on greenways and trails. And then if you get down, starting on page 37 and 38, and then it kind of has some more dialogue and then some other pages. It starts talking about different sections of intersections that we have and what the connections are like there. And then we start getting into some other areas as defined and where we have particularly some waterways, which is typically an area where you try to get trails along streams and things like that, or near streams and things like that. And then finally, as you get further back in the document, it also talks about different kinds of use, multimodal uses. And back on page 59, it really starts laying out really some different trails and potentially where they would be in the township. We're going to actually talk about another piece of that tonight. I believe it's the next item on the agenda. I just want to let you kind of know where we are, what we've done, and start getting some discussion in that. But when you start on page 59 back, it really starts on the different segments of the trails themselves. So this document looks at open space, and it also looks at trails. But the third piece of that is it also looks at how it connects to our already existing walkways and things like that. So everything that we're looking for is we want to see how we can move people around our community, hopefully keeping people from having to drive everywhere. We are one of the least walkable townships in Delaware, or not just townships, but municipalities in Delaware County. I think we score a 3 out of 10, very low. So that's why this is so important. And this group is so important to where we had as a township. And so I know that the board is very thankful that you've all volunteered to serve this and serve here. But this is really big work that will take a lot of time, but it's also something that I think is going to be very rewarding as we move forward, because as we start seeing connection points and we start being able to move from one section of the town to the other and start being able to connect people through trails, through sidewalks, and we start having places where people can bike and walk and all of those things, and all of that gets together, it really does improve our quality of life in the community. And so I'm very excited about this committee for that reason. And I think that this document does serve, and the purpose of this document is to serve as our baseline from where to start. And some of this will be as you start looking at it and start saying, I think this segment may need to be first, or this segment may need to be a priority, and those kind of things. And then we'll start looking and hopefully being ready to write grants when they come available and be ready to take action. And as we get not only things like what George talked about, getting a feasibility study that's very specific to a very specific segment, but then be ready, once we get that feasibility done, is to be ready to get grants and be able to actually implement some of these trails. And it's going to take some money from the township. It's going to take taxpayer dollars as well. But we couldn't afford to build all of these just on our dollars. And so on those places where we get the opportunity, we should take advantage of it. And so that's what we're going to be looking for as a group here.
Steve, I'm fairly familiar with the trails that go through land,
Yes.
but I don't have much feeling about the ones in the street. How does the township visualize in moving forward with that?
Would you say that again? I caught part of it, but you said the ones in where?
The street,
The street?
where all we're doing is marking off areas in the street in which to walk. How
Yeah.
does the township visualize moving forward with that?
Well, I think that, I mean, I don't want to speak for the whole board, obviously I can't do that. I'm speaking in general from the staff's perspective. I think that we see that there'll be sections that we may look kind of like what we did along Stony Brook and Troop Farm this last time when we repaved. We added bike lanes all the way through from Campus Boulevard all the way through to 250, from Route 3 all the way through to 252. And there had been some space there before, but we made it very distinguished, and we made it in that it was for bike. So I think we will look at those kind of things. There's been some talk with the board about taking a trail/bike lane down Sawmill, if we could do that at some point, to connect from our area and our trail and our Meadow Preserve with that trail and connect to Radnor and Skunk, thank you, Skunk Hollow. George is over here roasting in my ear, so I keep my mind straight. But to Skunk Hollow, and we think that's a big win for the community when we can do that. Right now, there's some real concerns about that. There's some very, winding areas, and there's some blind spots, and so we need to figure that out. We may need to do a little bit of widening in those areas to make sure there's enough room. Currently Sawmill's not even a very walkable road. People that live over there tell us all the time they want to go out and take a walk down their street, and they can't do it because the traffic's going by so fast. And so, those kind of things are things we have to look at, and we have to look at how do we do that safely, and how to really, I think that some of it is, how do we encourage a change from automobile use where we can to bicycles, to, electric bikes that become very popular, people walking and having that. People want that exercise, but right now there's not a lot of places in Newtown to say you can just go do that. And so all of that's a part of what this looks at. And if you look at some of these different spots on the map, they actually probably are referring to something that we take and we share the roadway with pedestrians, bikes, as well as vehicles.
I think an excellent start was in St. Albans Circle when started gathering the circle. And, you know, having an office there, it's a lot safer now than it used to be. That's great.
And hopefully we continue to make it safer and safer with what we're looking at doing there.
Yeah.
Justin.
Thank you, Steve. Next item on the agenda is the Penndot $650,000 multimodal grant.
So we applied for this multimodal grant. When we originally applied, I believe we applied for 2.2 million. And we actually applied to Penndot, and I believe we also applied to DCD for two different segments. The idea was to come up and take the sidewalk that comes in front of the township building, go up over to Campus Boulevard, take and make sure we had a connection across Campus Boulevard back down to Drexel Lodge, where hopefully everyone knows where Drexel Lodge is. That's one of our parks. Through Drexel Lodge, back out to Route 3 on the back side there, back out to Route 3, and then a connection. There's a small section of Route 3 where there's no sidewalk from where Uno Pizza is. When they developed Uno Pizza and CVS, they put in sidewalk, but there's a section from Uno up to, I believe it's College. Is that right, College? Up to College, that there's no sidewalk. And so, and then it goes up to Ellis, I'm sorry, all the way up to Ellis, so there's no sidewalk. And so we want to take that section and get sidewalk there, and then figure out a safe way to loop back to this location. So we would tie what is Gable Park out here where the ball fields are, and that area back there, there's a little trail that goes back and goes over to Campus Boulevard, and tie all of that together. It would be one nice big loop. And then when you start understanding that with the sidewalk, we now have a connection from 252 with sidewalk all the way up, all the way to Drexel Lodge. From Drexel Lodge, you could then walk, if we get that connection, all the way up to Acme and down, you know, it goes, there's sidewalk pretty well on one side of the road or the other going out of town, going towards Marple. And so you all of a sudden open up a lot of connections for people to go from Park and do that. And we even have a leg that would cut through into what we call the Florida Park area, if you know where that area is of the township. And so we put this together. It ended up being approximately about a $5 or $6 million project total. We've heard back from one of the grants that we put in for this, and we got $650,000 out of the 2.2 million. The township's not in a position to want to be in a position to write the check for the difference at this point. And so we need to take a look at that project and say, what would be a key piece of that project that we could put into place now for that roughly $650,000, with the township potentially we'd have some match that we're required to do, and we would do that. But what is that right amount to get us into that spot that we would start to lay the groundwork? And so the staff has been looking and saying, should we look at connecting Campus Boulevard through Drexel Lodge to where the next section would be to get us back to Route 3 on that piece? And so that's kind of where we've been focusing. But before we spend a lot of time, I wanted to talk to each one of you about it as a group and start letting you think about it and start, you know, I don't know that we need a decision today. We have until June of 2024 to do the project, but that's not a long window. I mean, by the time you go out and you design and build it, you know, it's a pretty short window. And so we don't have a lot of time, but over the next couple months, we should be making that decision about what that project would look like, go back to the granting agency and say, this is what the project will be based on the amount of funding that we received. Because obviously, like I said, doing a $3.3 million project and we only got 600,000 would leave a lot on the table for the township right now. And so that's the goal that we have with those dollars.
Do you visualize any difficulty because of the elevation of Campus Boulevard getting down to?
Yeah, there's going to end up, I mean, it is going to be a challenge, and it's, we're probably going to have to look at talking to one of the property owners that's over there about acquiring a piece of their property to get us into Drexel Lodge on that side. If not, we could go all the way up to 3. George and I have both looked at that. We don't consider that the most feasible entrance in regards to providing safety to get into the park that way. So we were thinking it was better to get into the park off of campus, basically kind of where, for those of you that know where they put this, the sanitary sewer through there, they actually cleared a whole area there.
Yeah.
And it would be an ideal spot, but it's, like I said, it's not all township owned at that point. It would be having to work with the property owner and getting an agreement to do that.
That seems to be the smallest differential.
It does seem to be the smallest differential. George and I have been out there, looked at that, and tried to figure out a better way, but that is probably the smallest differential.
I mean, if somebody really wants some exercise, they just go to the back of Drexel Lodge and go up that hill.
Yeah, that one is energy expending.
Yeah, I've been there. It took me a while to recover.
Yeah. So, so, I think our recommendation would be to come in and use that area and complete the trail through Drexel Lodge Park. If we could do that, I think, first of all, it would be a nice way of connecting Campus Boulevard to the park without somebody having to go out to 3. And then it would also be a great way to get people into the park and being able to, start really enjoying it and having a trail that goes through the park at that point. I think I think long-term, there would be a trail through Campus Boulevard that's actually off the road. That would be the best. And I say a trail because we typically think of sidewalk, we think of a concrete sidewalk. It may be that we would go with some kind of pervious type material along there. One of the challenges along that area that was looked at when they did this was that there are several areas where the trees are kind of planted very close to the curb. And so to avoid that, it would be a little difficult. And so we've looked, I think they determined it was the east side was the most feasible side to put the trail/sidewalk in along there. But that was what we looked at. And it would, it's this battle between providing walkways. You want the trees to stay, but at the same time, you got to move the trees back. And there's some really nice trees there that we're trying to figure out how to keep in place the best we can and put the trail in.
Has there been run it right along the road, or you could go buildings and kind of one being more feasible?
I think there was a little bit of an issue when they initially did the review was that back section, the grade changes are actually greater than out by the road. And one of the challenges we have is when we go and look at doing trails, particularly if we're getting state and federal funding, we need to meet ADA requirements on those. And so that steepness of the trail gets reduced significantly. You can have short periods, but you can't have long periods where that is. And there's some places in the back where it fluctuates pretty heavily. And so it's not that it's not possible. We would just have to really look at it and do some design and engineering.
How does that work with the pervious surfaces with ADA compliance? Like talking like gravel?
Not
Or
actually,
It'd have to be like an engineered material,
it would most likely be an engineered material, particularly if it's ADA.
like kind of like the plastic grid systems that they interlock where the grass can go through, that kind of stuff. Because you could still roll on it with a wheel a lot easier, and it wouldn't be as, there's a big thing with the green spaces and trying to get water back in the ground.
Sure.
That sort of thing.
I mean, we've even looked at full engineered, there's asphalt solutions, there's paving solutions, there are paver solutions. So there's a lot of options that we could look at, and it may be a mix throughout. We may do a section one way and another section another. One of the challenges obviously are when you do pervious types of solutions, almost all of them have a maintenance level that's much greater than non-pervious. And so we have to just look at that and build that into the process. For a township that has very little trails right now, as we start expanding that, one of the things we have to look at is, everything we add, we have to figure out how we're going to maintain and maintain well. The last thing that I want to see us do is put in 8 miles of trails around town and they all get overgrown because we can't maintain them properly. And so it's how do we set up the pattern to make sure that we can do it well.
So I got a question. I'm just trying to digest everything before I sort of like get into it. First question is, number one, you had mentioned that there's 2 planned purposes for expansion of greenways and trails, whatever we would call them. First would be exercise, well-being, I would consider it that way. More, if I go to a trail, if I go to the AT, if I go to a state park, I'm going there because I'm going there for exercise. I'm not going there to get a Coke, whatever. You have 2 main arteries that go through Newtown Square. You have 252 and PA3, both of which are extraordinarily used. Okay? We've had expansion with respect to traffic, keep flow. Is our plan to meet both of those common goals, or are we right now trying to expand on the current existing trailways that we have, which are more for like well-being, et cetera?
I think that I think it has. I think for it to be really successful, it's both. I think that obviously there may be a section that the real purpose is just for a good time of exercise, and that's fine. But the real win for our community overall is when we figure out how to make sure that the connections work so that people can make a choice instead of driving, instead of doing that I could actually go and catch this part of the trail and end up over here, and that's the place that I want to be within the community, and I can do it safely and enjoyably. And so that's I think we want to try to achieve both of those things.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense for certain communities within Newtown. In particular, the new developments here in Ellis Preserve. Even when I look back on Barron Road, the accessibility to Marble and those areas was pretty accessible. I could go to Giant if I wanted to.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm up on Wyola now on the Whitehorse. Do that.
Right.
It's not feasible.
Right.
It's not something I'm thinking, hey, I'm going to go walk, to the Acme down Newtown Street Road.
Right.
Which leads me into my second question is, to utilize that, and I would consider probably 8 out or 9 out of friends that I have out of 10 are going to be using it for purposes of instead of having to go to Ridley State Park, utilize what we have existing here. We have existing stuff here, and I've lived in this community for over 16 years, and I'm not even familiar with the maps. So one of the things I would recommend, and this was just pre-planning before I came here, is to have some type of money for information, community outreach to identify specifically what we have existing, what we intend to use it for. I know when we moved to Wyola and they ended up putting in Listener, one of the things, and this is miscommunication, was that trail was supposed to be specifically for Listener community. And I know that there's a lot of people that avoid the trails there because they believe it's Listeners walkways.
Okay.
So, that would be something I would suggest, moving forward, if we have some type of discussion, funding, so that people are very much aware of what we have. And then especially as we move forward for proposed, so that we do get, community involvement and discussion.
Yep.
Feedback off that. I work in a park. We have 35 miles of trails, and it's hard to find a trail map. So you don't know where the trails are. You don't know where they go. You don't even know this. I've been living here since, again, kind of along the same lines. Don't really necessarily know all the trails that are here. I've never seen a good cohesive map, and I think signage is important. Not that we want to put signs everywhere, but if we're trying to connect all the trails, making sure that people know how to get to places that clear.
Sure.
I would, I'm new to the area and I live in one of the new developments, Newtown Walk. So, I have access, of course, to Ellis Preserve and have used, Goshen Listener a lot. I think one of the issues with Listener is that the people there tell people that they can't. So I think part of it is just a good neighbor education process as part of that goes. But I will say I've lived in Hawaii for 30 years, Colorado, very outdoors oriented, big focus on the Aina, the land, et cetera. And I wonder, as we talk about community outreach, might there be opportunities where we could, like Douglas County in Colorado would have days where people could go out with, in this case was a park ranger, et cetera, to explore these new areas that were going to be developed, et cetera. In other words, where we could actually physically gather people to start to explore, and then they could take their network and say, hey, somebody showed me this trail. For instance, how many people have been into the Newtown Meadows? We tell everybody, and then they come back and go, wow, that's great. Thanks for telling me. So I think we can't underestimate that power of that human network, start telling those stories, for us on our behalf. Because, what I've found is if we can start to show them these little nuggets, we might help raise their expectations, what they want for their communities. Let's sort of imagine the possibilities. That's how I like to say.
Along those same lines, there are trying to get everyone to feel welcome in Newtown. I know we're predominantly white. There are other ethnic groups. There are specific outdoor groups like Afro, outdoor Afro, and other groups for women, gay hiker babes, and other groups. If we did something like that, where we're inviting people to come out, also inviting those groups. There's representatives of everyone from the community, so everyone feels welcome, and it's not just it's for those kind of make.
That's a very good point. And I will say, in another life, I used to be the chapter chair of the Hawaii Sierra Club, and I've built trails. I'm good with the chainsaw, so I don't mind, getting out there and helping. And of course, I know probably, John, once you start building trails and doing these things, you have this. That's what it takes. And I know Leonard said his wife, I think, was involved in some trail building or clearing, some sort of public outreach thing. So, but yeah, I think getting the community more involved here, right, of all.
I think one of the problems with the Newtown Meadow Preserve is currently access. And it doesn't help that Episcopal has its no trespassing sign to the left of the road that we have an easement on. And what that sign is on is a 10-foot strip. So I think we need to persuade them maybe to open up a little bit. I think the preserve is going to be wonderful if we get sufficient parking. And I know I have put something in the hopper. I don't know whether the board has looked at it in any detail, but I think we can get a lot of parking spaces right down that road next to the preserve, which can open things up for all kinds of meetings and concerts and things like that. So I think that should be one of the first priorities for the township, even though it may not fit within our umbrella.
I think one of the things that, particularly with the Meadow Preserve, we have a couple of restrictions there that we're going to have to watch. And so, it is set to be a passive type of recreation place. And so, that's when we develop that, that is a deed restriction that we have on that. So that'll be part of that we would look at as this group is, because one of the things will be there's a trail system within there that needs to be developed. There's a trail system to connect to that. I believe it was the end of last year, the board, beginning of this year. I'm a little bit off on my dates. COVID fuzzy maybe. But I know we purchased the land that was the fire department land at the corner of Sawmill. And we're working with the engineer right now to build a plan to do some widening there. But one of the things that we're talking about is how do we get from that side of the street, if we can put some parking there to even get over to connect to the trail, to go up and go both ways. I shared earlier the concept of taking Sawmill and having a walking area down Sawmill. And if we can connect to the park in Radnor and Skunk Hollow, then all of a sudden now you've really started to create a network that one of the challenges we have right now is we're very segmented in our trails. We've got a 1 mile trail along Goshen Road that we have that's really set. We've got a short piece really out back here through Gable Park that goes out and over, like I said, to Campus Boulevard. And the township hasn't yet taken dedication of the trail at Listeter. We will be taking dedication here probably in the next couple of months. We're waiting on them to finish up some stuff. I know George has got to go out and meet with them again and make sure that it's in the condition for us to take dedication for it. And once that happens, we're going to make sure it's signed properly and all of those kind of things. And it is open to the public. It is a right of way that's there now, but we just haven't taken dedication to that. So we need to do that, and we will. So that will then really start to give us a pretty solid start. If you're aware, when the Presbyterian Church came in to do their project right there at the corner of Goshen and 252, one of the things that the board asked for was a connection piece over through, and so that we could have a crosswalk over through there, and you have that connection. It was an important piece, and we have a couple parking places that are dedicated for the township folks to go there and park and then be able to connect and go up. So, there's we're really starting to have a lot of things start to fall together. If you go back 5-10 years, it was just all segments, but now we're starting to get some pieces to fit together. And as this committee meets and talks, it's like, how do we continue to just expand those pieces? And that's where I really think our focus needs to be is, how do we expand what we have to make it better? And then where else can we create some connection points easily and do that? And that's where that's where the real wins will come. And then we can talk about how we publicize all of those things. As soon as the township takes dedication to that Listeter Trail, we probably should do exactly that and go out and have a walk and invite folks. And this committee could really lead that and say, this is what we have today. And here's some ideas that we're thinking about, and start getting feedback from the community while you're doing that. And that would be a great opportunity to really hear people say, I'm going to use it for running. I'm going to use it for biking. I'm going to use it just for walking. And as you understand that, then that helps determine what the trail looks like in the process.
Question, this is we've talked a lot about exercise. Of course, I'm a runner myself, but are there possibility for places like at the Meadows for a little bench? Because while I am fit, while I can, walk forever, etc., I just wonder if we would introduce other people who may not be as fit or want to work up to that, if we just had a few very simple benches, whether it's through a donation process. I don't, know yet how the county operates, but for some of those places, I would think that a place to just sit for a moment might be attractive.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And understanding where the right places are to do that along the trails will make a big difference. The Meadow Preserve, there's a master plan that's for the whole Meadow Preserve. My recommendation would be for folks in this committee to at least look online and look at the trail portion of it, at least understanding that a lot of it is meant to be replanted and made with native plantings to create a native plant meadow. That's the major piece of that. But there is a whole trail system through there for walking around. There's a section supposed to have a boardwalk to go through some of the wetlands areas. So there's some education spots and all of those things. George's team has been out there and they've put up some fencing purposely. Hope you've seen that. And the purpose was to kind of show folks where the lines are, you know, and remind folks that when they do leave the property, that they're actually going on somebody else's property, and understand that, because it's kind of hard, particularly when you get back on the back side of that 50 acres towards the back as you're walking, you know, kind of away from 252, you get back there, and a lot of people don't realize that there's a spot where you actually leave township land. George's team is looking at, I don't know if you've gotten it finished, you may already have it finished, the connection point that's on township land so that we can do that. I know, you know, we've been really looking at some of those things until we can get and do that full project, because there is going to be a balance there between making it so that it's ADA compliant and having access. And at the same time, there's going to be spots that we can't do that in that area. But we want to make sure that those who have some difficulties can enjoy it. And then there'll be some spots, but there's supposed to be spots where you can stop and do some bird watching and all kinds of things through there and in going forward. But you're right, there's lots of opportunity to put places for people to stop and rest.
This may be as far as few and far between. Their signage or why this is important about how to behave, how you know, leave no trace. Even for the cyclist areas, you know, kind of the order of who gets the right of way if you're riding a bike or you're on a trail where people may be walking or riding or horses or whatever. Is there any that type of information that could be important and also make, I mean, especially the education part, you know, whether it's environmental ed or the history of the area, like, or anything like that.
We've talked, I mean, George and I and the staff have talked about some of those exact things. You know, I think we knew that this was kind of coming here recently and we had not moved forward. We've not taken dedication of the Listener Trail yet. So, you know, that's, we don't want to go throw up a bunch of signs right now, you know. But we've talked even signage on the Goshen Trail, some of what needs to be done there. But what I would hope is that this group would help us decide what's the best way to do that and to make recommendations back to the board. And then the board would go ahead and approve those and we would move forward and get them done. You know, staff has a lot of ideas, but we want to make sure, you know, we talk all the time. We want to make sure it's really coming from the community and not just us, because sometimes we get caught up on the things like insurance and things like that. And we're worried about those kind of things. But we want to make sure that, like, when you talk a good point, you know, like I hadn't really thought about the part about where bikes go, who gives way to who. Those things are important on some of these trails. And some trails, we may say this trail really shouldn't be a bike trail, should only be walking because of the way it's set up, you know, and, or if you're going to be on this section, you need to walk your bike through this area because it's just not wide enough for both walking and biking.
What would be really cool is as we complete some of these connections and launch some new trailheads and trails, that we could maybe launch an app that has all of that information on it. These are the new trails, these are the existing trails, these are the new connections as a result of the work that this committee is doing and that you all have done, so that when, you know, looking at the website at home in newtowntownship.org, which I'm sure has maps on it, will be helpful for input. But if people at home or on the road on their way to a trail can pull up an app that says, you know, this is a new trail, this is an existing trail, this is a new connection, I can take this all the way to Radnor Township. That would be a really great way to educate people also on the history and the environmental impact and where it's ADA compliant, where you can bird watch, where you have to be on the bike versus pedestrian access points. That could be a really cool progressive way to show that Newtown Township is sort of at the forefront and sort of pioneering in some of the greens and trailway strategies that we're implementing too.
Sure. I want to comment on that. So one of the things I was thinking about throughout this whole process has been everything I do is on my phone. I travel for work sometimes, and one of the things I'm always doing is pulling open every app that I can to find trails, right? but there are great apps that are way better than we at this township could ever create.
Yes.
If you have an account, you can literally add them yourself. You don't need, like, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but if you have a small business and you try to get your address added to Google, it's almost impossible. This type of stuff is actually pretty simple, like really widely accessible, free apps, all that kind of stuff. So that's definitely something that would be helpful, because I use it all the time when I go over to Ococking or just anywhere. I'll pull it open constantly. With the way the phones are these days with GPS, it's nice too. We just follow you along the whole trail. But I want to go back to what Joe mentioned. It started all these tangents. I mean, you were asking a question about, you know, you have the two main goals here, but I'm assuming, I'm maybe putting words in your mouth, but you're talking more about what is the priority. Yep. And I'm thinking of all this stuff, and I'm realizing we have a huge undertaking. We need to start thinking about what are the priorities. They're probably going to be short-term, midterm, and long-term goals of this community, some of which are going to well outlast us even on this. As far as preservation of green spaces, I mean, who knows? There might be something that we have to negotiate with the Episcopal or Aronimink even, as far as like guaranteeing that some of the open spaces they currently have don't get sold and taken away over time. That's like way long. And we have, so I'm just trying to figure out where are the priorities.
I think that's one of the things we want to focus on perhaps at the next meeting.
Yeah. scheduling all
Everybody
that
should be
stuff.
reviewing this and come in prepared to talk about what they consider important.
As far as how we're gonna go at this, I mean, first step of any big undertaking is we got to start organizing on what are our priorities so we can start figuring out what are the trail segments. Are we going to prioritize the likelihood of getting any of these done over the idealistic view of it? So in the case with the park, there are some areas that you're saying are preserves, and we have to be really careful. We want to develop, but likely, because the entire purpose of this is supposed to be open and green spaces. We have to walk that line, and we have to decide on what's more important here. Is we have to think that there are going to have to be some that we're going to need to get done rather quickly. And then we got to step back and realize there's some that we don't want to cause more harm just to accomplish something, because there might be the long-term plan. It's better off to be patient, bide our time, build up the funds we need to get those done. That's one of the things that I'm personally very sensitive to when it comes to state parks and national parks, is trying to realize not to get that target fixation when you're so goal-oriented, you kind of defeat the purpose of what you're going after. To get people to enjoy how green it is, how great it is.
Yeah, I think we should
So
be
the
looking at
priorities
the
to circle back is,
opportunities,
what are the
but also the constraints. You know, for each project, what things do we have to overcome to make it work? And we should sort of have to nibble away at those until we get all of them done, and then the things will happen. I mean, there's a number of opportunities now that if we hit pay dirt, it's going to be absolutely fantastic. But who knows what the probability is now? So we have to work on the low-hanging fruit, but we also have to get our game together on each of these large home runs and see if we can get that, because one of those comes in and we're off and running. We're going to have to be really proud once we get to that point.
Yeah, I think that this group will have the opportunity to kind of help set the direction and make recommendations back to the board for the township, and say, we really think these three trail segments are the most important of the ones, and here's why. And then you put a presentation together and you go back to the board and you get their buy-in and their ownership in that as well. And now when every time a grant comes up, that becomes where the funding, that's what we start asking for, because we now know where the set of priorities are that we have set as a township for each one of those. If you look in this document, there's a lot of options for trails, and I'd love to say we're going to do all these in the next 5 years. That would be the greatest thing. It would be awesome. I don't think we're going to do all these in the next 5 years, but I'd be happy if we started plugging away and started having key pieces added and looking at the trail system that we have and making sure, there's two things that I think you want to look at. One is that as we look at the trail system, where we can add that it extends what we already have is always important, but also to make sure that there's not areas of the community just because they're not right where we are today that are getting left out. And so how do we put the balance to both of those and say what makes the most sense? Like, make very good sense to connect to something in Radnor because now we're connecting regionally. And when we connect regionally, it increases the chance of us getting funding. And so, those are important. And it might be that and that's one of the reasons why we talked about the presentation that George gave earlier is that's a key piece because the county sees it as a key piece. But when we started looking at what it connected to us, all of a sudden now, if we extend a Goshen Road Trail, if we extend, and get through the Meadow Preserve and look at the connections there and make sure everything's good and go down Sawmill, you've now created a really huge loop that's really impactful and it crosses over multiple townships, potentially even into a different county if we get over into Chester County for some of this. I said Chester, I'm sorry, I meant Chester. That's right. I'm sorry. I was all of a sudden went back to my Kansas City days and was going to say Clay County. But anyway, so we get back over to Chester County and you've now connected across county lines, you've connected across municipal lines, and the funding opens up way more for those type of projects because they see those as regional. And then all of a sudden, some of our trails become regional trails and in the connection. So, it does make sense to set the priorities and set the direction, looking at all of those different pieces. And this document will help us do that. And that's why I wanted to make sure you all had this document, make sure you have a chance to really read through it, understand how it functions and what it says. And then, I think you're right. I think coming back and starting to set some of the priorities. And you've brought up some really great things about making sure we bring the community along with us in, through the process and build excitement because that'll make a big difference.
Okay, a couple of things that my own way, kind of visualized that this group might take on. And again, it's going to be up to the board as a whole. But I think we want to try to make use of outside groups, especially trail groups. And we have two good ones locally. One of them is the Friends of Marshall Newtown Trails. And the other one's the Running Place. You see folks running or walking. If I were doing it, I would be walking, going around the neighborhood, which is sponsored by the Running Place. And I've spoken to these two people and they're very much interested. I think we can get them involved in maintenance of the trails itself and also in setting up events. So I think what we need, I believe, is people in this group to sort of work with them and, see what they're doing and give advice, but keep them a little bit on the leash would be
I
good.
volunteered to work with the Running Place because I'm in
Oh, you
that
did?
Monday night group.
Okay.
Yeah.
I almost ran into a couple of them.
Yeah, look out now. That's why I know exactly where that sidewalk ends, because you have to turn into the neighborhood behind the church, because there is no further sidewalk to go up. But I've run right up 252 as well with the running group, and it's scary.
Yeah.
So they have ideas, yeah.
Yeah, and I think this way we could take a good deal of pressure off the township as far as maintenance is concerned, with the proper oversight. Also like to see community events. We've talked about this in part, but the walking, bird watching, working with children would, I think, be fantastic. Photography lessons. It potentially endless, and it could make our presence a lot more visible in the township once these things get started. Now, I don't know whether you know about Haverford Township and what they've done with the trail system. It's fantastic. And I would love to get couple of those folks in here to speak to this group and see the liaison that they've been able to put together with public groups and the township, and they're the gold standard. And when we want to know how it's done, we go to Haverford Township right now because they're that good. I mean, we're doing things with the on-site drainage systems that we've gotten from them, and a number of other things. I think one more thing that we should be thinking of is working closely with the outside groups. Whatever our counterparts might be in neighboring townships, I think if we meet with them, see what the communality of interest might be, I think it could lead to a lot of solutions. But we also have really good groups here in Newtown already, the EAC, the Parker Rec, Newtown Square and Bloom, and Gather in the Circle. And we should try to work as closely as we can with those particular groups. If they need people, maybe we can supply them and vice versa. We're all getting together for the right cause. And I think there's going to be a lot of synergism that started. So those are my ideas. I know people will have others as well, but I'd like to hear from everybody.
Kind of like you were talking about, I mean, there's a bike shop pretty close to St. Albans Circle, right? The bike store up there?
It's not there anymore.
It's not there anymore. Never mind. I was gonna say, because like, that's just another group that if it was, but I'm trying to think that where the closest bike shop is. Because that's something, if we're talking about intermodal transportation grants and getting bike lanes and stuff like that. I was a part of one for years where we used to specifically go on certain new routes. And cycling, I've been hit by trucks twice when I was by myself. But when you're in a group, it always feels much better, always feels a little bit more safe. And then you kind of also are helping other people figure out where you can safely ride. So maybe I gotta look into it. I know
There's one in Paoli.
and there's that Trek store in Radnor too. Yeah. So that might be something.
Westchester too.
Process
Yeah,
question.
Westchester's huge. That's
Yeah,
right.
they have
Westchester's a lot of big cycling.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Process question, John. You mentioned a lot of organizations. I looked up the Marple Newtown Trails because I'm a hiker, et cetera. But where's the place where we can start to store some of these things, post a link so we can go back, check at our leisure to read more about it and all have resources. Trying for us to take.
Yeah,
It's hard- it's
I
a
think
little
there should be a
difficult.
central location where all of these groups are described. I know Doug Humes is Marple Newtown Trails. I think he would be glad to come in with a presentation if
He's at
people would like.
halftrail.com, I see.
Yeah, yeah.
Is
And
there a township,
Like base
I'll say
camp
it's
or-
like a server on it,
Or base
a
camp?
Dropbox or something, or the different council committee members for you guys, where we can start storing stuff that we can all access.
So
Need like a
You
portal
would-
Yeah.
for our committee.
Like
I know we have the
Like
portal, but I didn't
base
know if we could
camp or
actually save things to it, if we could have kind of like a share file space with it.
yeah, right now, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm gonna stand up.
John, I have another meeting. I have to excuse
Okay.
myself. Sorry. Thank you.
thanks for coming.
Nice to meet you all.
Aaron, I'll make sure that either I or Mike have this conversation with you,
Please.
because this is going to be the important part outside of everything else that you all are doing, which is extremely important. So Leonard Altieri, I'm one of the supervisors here in Newtown Township. I am second fiddle to Supervisor Russo over there, who was the mastermind of this committee as well as your liaison. So to kind of answer that question, and I'm also going to have to run out of here too, so I'm happy that I'm commandeering this part of the meeting, Mr. Chairman, to just say a few things. So first off, a lot of energy in this room, and it's great. The township has wanted this for a very long time, and we're looking forward to working with all of you in accomplishing the goal of that Trails and Greenways Committee, but also kind of expanding a little bit more off of that, what we can do. But one thing that is extremely important to remind everyone, and this is where I took the tie off, but I kept the jacket on because you're never too far away from a lawyer, right? And I think Mr. Falcon can appreciate this, is that now that you all are part of this, you now fall under the Ethics Commission in Pennsylvania. You're all considered public officials for the definition of a public official under the Ethics Act. So what does that mean? It means that you now have a series of laws that are going to be applied to you. So the Sunshine Act, most importantly, outside of the way that the meetings will be conducted, I'll let the township manager speak more on that. But two big glaring things that you all need to be aware of is that, number one, the Ethics Commission refers to a meeting as any organization or any group where there's a quorum present. So there's 9 of you on this commission. If there are 5 of you in, walking a trail, if there's 5 of you getting a beer, if there's 5 of you having a lunch, and you start talking about your positions here on the Trails Committee, that is technically a violation of the Sunshine Act. The Ethics Commission will view that as a quorum being present, and you're conducting a public business or having a meeting. That's number one. Number two, that also applies to emails. You cannot have any communication in an email where you are discussing your point of view or your opinion or how you would vote. You can most certainly have emails as informational only, but there cannot be any dialogue or any decision-making that takes place outside of this meeting. The Ethics Commission will view that as well as a violation of the Sunshine Act. That also applies to group text messages. It applies to social media forums, so Facebook Messenger, Instagram, so on and so forth. If there are 5 of you present, they will view that as a violation of the Sunshine Act if you're discussing anything that has to do with your position here in the township. So getting back to the original question that Anthony raised, there is a system where you will receive your agendas, which is drawing a blank on what that's called, Steve. What's that called?
It's part of Civic Plus.
Civic Plus. So you'll receive it through that, but there is no Dropbox forum for you to kind of store that information. And I don't know if the township would want to, one, be responsible for maintaining that structure, number one. And number two, I am always one to veer on the side of caution. And so I would not want documents that are being stored in a cloud server where opinions can be opined on them inside those text documents. Because again, the Ethics Commission could come back and say that that might be a violation of the Sunshine Act. The Ethics Commission, their teeth is through fines. So there are cases where you get together a group of people and we all hope you all become friends and you can all gather, trust me, you can all be together. Like case in point, I had the supervisors all went out to dinner one time. We brought our spouses. You can be seen in public together. You just can't have conversations about what's going on. And trust me, after a few months, you're not going to want to have conversations about what's going on here. You're going to want to talk about other things that are happening. So the Ethics Commission, there is case law where they will drop fines. You're talking $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. And all of your correspondence as well is subject to the right to know law. I should also note that as well. So if you do not want something, the way to think of this, I tell my clients, if you don't want it on the front page of the New York Times, don't put it in writing. Don't put it in an email to everyone, because any member of the public can request a copy of your emails, whether they're personal or if you were to set up an email account for just the trails here. So that's the fun aspect of being now considered a public official. The other stuff that I just want to kind of jump on, again, because I said I do need to go out of here, is this committee has a lot of energy and excitement, not just among the board of supervisors and the community here in the township, but elected officials in adjacent communities. I speak probably weekly, if not bi-weekly, to some of the commissioners over in Radnor. They are ecstatic that we now have this commission and that we are now up and running and that we're going to be able to have connectivity between Newtown Township and Radnor. I've had conversations with supervisors in Edgemont, supervisors in Willistown and Easttown. They are excited to start having that connectivity of not just keeping it isolated here in Newtown Township, but being able to move us around, as Stephen said, into different counties, into different municipalities. So there is a lot of energy, not just here in this township, but also around the township. So I don't think you're going to have any lack of information. I don't think you're going to have any lack of getting organized, individuals to accomplish these goals. So that's something that's exciting. And the last thing too, again, just to kind of remind everyone, so Mike is a liaison to this. All of you will have his contact information already. Feel free to reach out to him. Feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to any of the other supervisors. But if you have a big question and you just want to kind of see, how's the board of supervisors gonna react to it, talk to Mike. Mike will have a pulse of the board. Mike will have, your best interest as well as the community's best interest. And that is what the role of the liaison is. Mike will not have a vote. He will be there as an advisor, essentially, to tell you what the board's thinking, or there might be some information you're not privy to that he'll be able to tell you. And again, while it's good to have synergy with these other groups, it's also important to remember that you have a very distinctive role, and they have very distinctive roles as well. And we need to work very hard to make sure that we don't blur those lines. We can work together 7 days a week. That's not a problem. But we need to make sure that the Trails Committee is focused on trails. We need to make sure that the EAC is focused on EAC initiatives. We need to make sure that Parks and Rec is focused on Parks and Rec. Once you get your feet wet, you'll start understanding what the differences are. Steve and George will remind you every day what the differences are as well, because we just want to make sure that each group is keeping their independence and moving forward into accomplishing the overarching goal. So I believe I've hijacked this enough, but if anybody has any, yes, Miss.
This could be way ahead of the game, but I see part of my contribution here is publicity because of my background in writing. And what you just said gives me pause, and I can talk to you about it later, but the Sunshine Act, does that mean anything that I would offer for publicity, whether we're posting on a Facebook page that we eventually get, or that we're developing a massive series of maps and trailheads? Does that mean that anything that I do has to go through everyone, or?
Well, right, so I'll answer it this way. If you're having a post that says we're doing a trail walkthrough at the Goshen Trail, you don't have to have the board vote on you before you go and put that post out there. The Sunshine Act only applies to decision-making events, if you will, or decision-making meetings. So you having a Facebook post out there that says, come to the meeting on Monday, that's not a violation of the Sunshine Act. That wouldn't even fall into the Sunshine Act. The Sunshine Act only applies to where there's a decision being made. The public needs to be duly notified, it needs to be duly advertised, and it needs to be debated and discussed in public. But you putting a Facebook post out there saying, hey, we're having a bird walk at the Meadow Preserve, you don't need to come to this board for approval of that. Quite frankly, all of us are going to want to publicize that anyway, because that's not making a decision. If you understand the difference I'm trying to parse out there. So that's what the big difference is. The Sunshine Act only applies to decision-making events. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I just clarify, the decision to have the walk happens here.
Okay.
Once you go to publicize, then you're free.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And Terry, if I can just jump on something. So again, talking about the excitement that this board of supervisors has for this Trails Committee, and Terry just hit it perfectly, and it was one of the notes, I'm happy he said it. What's amazing about this group is that each and every one of you bring a very strong link in this chain. You have engineers, you have PR people, you have lawyers, unfortunately, right? You've got people who have worked in architecture, you have individuals who work for the park system, you have long-term residents, you have people who work in mediation, right? Because as Stephen said, this is not going to be rainbows and sunshine. And Mike and I said this to each and every one of you when we were interviewing you. You will have situations where you need to put all your cards on the table, and communication is going to be key with a lot of these neighbors and a lot of these community stakeholders in a lot of these neighborhoods. And my firm belief is that as long as you are completely honest and you're up front and you get out in front of things, it makes the rest of the ship sailing much smoother. But if you kind of hold back a little bit because you want to keep moving forward, you're going to run into some rough seas. And it could derail a very good project just because there's a misunderstanding on something. Someone else had their hand up.
I was going to ask, and putting my nonprofit hat on, since my background has been running nonprofits for years, is there anything that we need to, we've accepted, of course, but conflict of interest? Are there any of the other nonprofit type, guidance, rules that apply to us serving on the committee from us, and just in terms of knowing everybody's background? I know, John, you had said you had read everybody's resumes. Perhaps I missed that online. Is it all posted online then?
Not as
Do
yet.
that
I think,
homework. So it would be helpful certainly for me to just, as putting context in place to know where everyone's coming from. But again, conflict of interest is certainly something that I've always had to be mindful of as I work with various architect board members who, might have involvement in projects, et cetera. And you need to know when people need to.
Yeah, and I would say that responsibility will fall on the individual board member. I don't think it's necessarily the rest of the board's responsibility to know who has a conflict and when they have conflict. I think that it's valid. If you know that someone does have conflict, you can voice that before a vote is taken. But in terms of conflict of interest, yes, you're bound by that as well. If your husband was a contractor and he's going out to bid and you guys are about to award it to him, then yeah, you need to recuse yourself from that situation. But the conflict will rest, and that responsibility rests with the individual board member.
And it does, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, though, to just sort of provide that sort of overlay, is that, as you are sharing with us things to be mindful of.
Yeah.
It's certainly something I know.
And the Ethics Commission defines a conflict of interest as a pecuniary interest being conferred on you that's not being conferred on someone else. And if for immediate family, it includes kids, grandparents, nieces, I think it's aunt, uncle, and obviously spouse. It's the five. Those are the five that are in there.
but also a business that you might.
Yeah,
have.
but yeah, of course, a
Well,
business
yeah.
interest would absolutely.
Yeah, well, those five would trigger what the connection is with that business interest.
But
And
you did bring up a good point.
PR would be right.
Does anybody have objection to sharing your resumes with other people in the committee? Because I think it's important that everybody knows what everybody else is capable of doing. I think it's going to move things forward a little bit quicker.
I've said I would certainly find that helpful, so I would
Yeah.
certainly be happy.
Yeah.
I do want to apologize. Meg, which is massive compared to the general public, so I'm sorry.
I enjoyed every half hour.
I would make note that typically the way we handle getting documents to everyone that's on the committee is through the agenda. We're very careful to make sure that information is shared publicly through the process, because it is a public process that you're doing. And so, that not everything has to be that way, but, if you're working on a document, it's not ready to go public, we wouldn't make it public yet. We can handle getting that to you through the agenda process and keep it differently. But as you start discussing it, it becomes that public document, and it'll be on the, just like some of what you see up there where it's highlighted in blue, those are links so you can pull up the document and you can see what it is that we're talking about. I just make one other comment regarding the Sunshine Act. There's just been a change in the agenda piece. And so one of the things that's on here is items for our next agenda. When we enter in and we have an agenda set for the evening, there's a pretty specific piece of having to follow that agenda. And we're not as free just to add anything just along the way. That's a state law that went into effect, or actually goes into effect at the end of the month. I think it's the 29th or something like that. We will be, as staff, you'll have a person who's specifically related to this. Steve is actually going to be the person who's handling getting the agenda put up in our system and doing all of those kind of things and making sure everything's there. One of the things he'll be doing is making sure that he'll be asking, is there anything for the agenda? And, we'll send out when we send out an email, if we send it out to everybody, I almost always put at the top, the board sees it all the time. Do not respond all. I put it up there all the time. Do not respond all. if you're feeding us information back, you send it back, just reply to the one of us that's at the township so we can put it on and get it to there. You can talk with John as the chair about whether it goes on, but when you start responding all, you're opening yourself up to a Sunshine Act violation. And so we almost start every email that way. Do not respond all. That way, everybody's just kind of reminded, you know, when you're replying to something, please don't do that. And so, but we do want to get everything you want to discuss on the agenda ahead of time, because adding something to the agenda on the floor has got more requirements. You can do it. It requires a vote, at least a majority. It requires that once we do it, we repost the agenda again the next day within 24 hours. There's also, we have to give a reason why it was added to the agenda, and then we have to give the vote of it being added to the agenda, who voted to add it to the agenda. So there's a lot of requirements that happen with that. So my goal is not to do that. I'm not saying we can't, and we'll get you that information. I will make one other comment. I meet with all of the chairs of the boards every other month, just to go through things like that, to make sure the chair is aware and do those kind of things. We're also working on some stuff for all the secretaries so that they know how to get into the agenda software and add minutes and things like that. We'll make sure everybody has all that information.
So that relates to the public too, like if somebody comes in during the public comment stage, if it's not on the agenda, they can't bring it up, or can they, and then we can vote on it? Like, how does that work?
The public can always make a comment, and that's not an issue because we don't, you know, they can come in and make a comment. What you do with it then becomes important. If it's de minimis, and I'll let Leonard define what de minimis is on one of these meetings, but typically if it's of no major importance, you can probably go ahead and act on it in that meeting. But typically what we would say, and what the board's taking the stance is, we're going to take it, we're going to refer it back to staff. Staff's going to have it on the next agenda. And if there's some information that we need to have for you, we'll have that information for you. So when you're ready to take an action on it, we've done some research and given that to you ahead of time.
Yeah, I was just, the way it was written on here, public comment for agenda items only. That's why I figured it was linked to that Sunshine Act thing.
No, the idea is I have public comment on here twice. If you look, the first public comment, we try to keep just to agenda items so that you don't spend, you know, if people come in and they're talking about something that's not on the agenda, we refer that to the end.
Yeah.
So that you can get through your business and take care of those things. And then at the end, you open it up for just general public comment if it's not some specific on the agenda.
What deadline do we have for getting information for the agenda?
It's the Wednesday before the meeting, the week of the meeting. So for example, this is going to meet the third Wednesday. So, third Tuesday. So typically it will be the second Wednesday. On a rare occasion, it might be the third Wednesday, depending on how the week falls, or how the month falls. If it starts on a Wednesday, then you could potentially have it that it's the third Wednesday before we get to the third Tuesday. So, but we're going to send you out we'll send out a schedule for you specifically for this committee of when we need everything for this agenda.
Does anybody have suggestions for agenda items at this point?
I picked up a couple from your discussion. I have on here that you want to be working on setting priorities. And so I have that on here. You want to assign people to some outside groups. And so I have that as items that you'll want to go ahead and take official action on at the next meeting. I think there was one other one. I think they were the two big ones that I know that you had on here. And if there's something else, I'm glad to take it.
The outside groups thing, I mean, does that also encompass the neighboring townships and their respective committees that are similar to us, such as Radnor?
Yeah, I think if you're
referring to more just the
No, outside as well.
same one, okay.
Does that include having somebody like Douglas Hume come in and speak, or what does that mean?
Yeah, that would include that.
Okay.
And I'd like to hear at some point what each of you would like specifically to contribute. Oh, I think I know generally what you're good at, or your resumes are fantastic. But, you know, what area you might be interested in?
Now or the next meeting?
Anytime.
I think that would be beneficial for you as the chair. That doesn't clog up your meeting.
Okay, we can do that.
That's just, again, that's just, take it or leave it.
Yep.
I'm not a board member.
Maybe a skills inventory sheet, just a one pager of saying you want to work on bum, 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 and
Yeah.
just, even if you're not superlative in your background, but you have an interest.
There's a lot of superlatives here.
Isn't that awesome?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Okay, is there any additional business to become before the meeting? Is there any board comment? Any public comment? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
He's gonna say-
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
I just want to thank everybody for volunteering to be on the Trails Committee. I think there's a lot of opportunity to really improve what we have already started on in this town. And I know a lot of us, when we talked on the phone during the interview process, talked about the utilization of the trails, and especially after the past year and a half. I think it's imperative that we have such dedicated individuals like yourself that have volunteered to help us expand this process. I just want to thank everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, folks. Good meeting.
There.